All right, it's 11-ish Mountain Time on Monday morning, which means that it's time for This Week in Space. What is up, my friends? Welcome. Come on in, sit down, relax. Let me regale you with some tales of the celestial spheres and what's going down this week in space. We will be looking at This Week in Space from August the 11th, 2025 through August the 17th. Good morning, Gina Maria. Good morning, Jesse Brown. Nice to see everybody. Come on in and take a load off. Let me tell you some tales. Let me, just talk you through your morning and help you prepare yourself for whatever is unfolding in the astro weather this week. Before we jump into the astrology, my name is John Emerson Bell. I'm an astrologer, tarot reader. Sorry, put this on do not disturb. There we go. Uh, I'm a astrologer, tarot reader, licensed mental health counselor in the land of enchantment, and I do astrological coaching and a bunch of stuff. Sometimes astrology themed DJ, and I like to come here every Monday morning at 11-ish to give y'all the astro weather to help you prepare for what space might have in store. Um, I'm going to be co-facilitating a retreat for the autumn equinox in Epidavros, Greece. That'll be occurring September the 20th through 27th. We're going to be talking about healing waters, sacred waters. We'll be visiting some sacred sites, some sacred springs. We'll be doing a lot of dream work, a lot of magic. I'll be talking about the water signs in the chart and the element of water, both astrologically and magically. And it'll be really cool. So if you want to hang out and you want to go explore some of the mythology of ancient Greece and do some magic, come on down. You can go to the website themysteries.org and go to the retreats page to get some more info or to sign up today. I think that there may be one or two spots left. So if you're interested, if you're on the fence, if you've been waiting, I recommend signing up before it's all gone. Okay, I think that's all of the announcements that I have to kick us off. So, without further ado, let us jump into the astrology of the week. Again, we are looking at This Week in Space from August the 11th, 2025 through August the 17th of 2025. Kicking us all off today, Monday, August the 11th, we have Mercury stationing direct. Air horn emoji. Mercury stationing direct in Leo at 4 degrees and 14 arc minutes of that fixed fire sign. This Mercury's direct station occurred early this morning. That would have been at 12:29 in the AM, that specific time, making that 3:29 in the AM on the East Coast. And so before we jump into the meaning and whatnot, let's just recap some dates from Mercury's retrograde through Leo. Mercury entered its shadow phase on June the 29th at 4 degrees and 14 arc minutes of Leo, which is where Mercury stationed today. The shadow, just for folks who don't know, is that space that Mercury will retrograde through. So Mercury met that point at 4 degrees and 14 minutes of Leo when they were moving direct. That was back in at the end of June, and then they reached their retrograde station on July the 17th at 15 degrees and 34 arc minutes of Leo. And then they moved all the way back to that 4 degree 14 mark. And then they will return to that, they will leave their shadow phase on August the 25th when they return to that 15 degree 34 arc minute mark in Leo. And then just one more noteworthy note. Mercury had their cazimi, that's the conjunction with the sun, and that is sort of the heart of the retrograde. And that was back on July the 31st at 9 degrees of Leo. So that's a little of the sort of map of Mercury's retrograde. Now let's get into maybe some more of the meaning, some of the archetypal information. So Mercury deals with how we process information and how we make sense of our inner experience. Mercury gathers data and translates it into language, right, which helps us to structure and make sense of our experience and to create meaning so that we can move through the world. Mercury names objects, events, emotions. It labels things like good, bad, neutral, and it categorizes them. Then our minds create stories from these names and labels and categories to begin to make sense of our experience. However, um, it, our mind and however, in our mind, our experiences are not necessarily the stories that we tell about them, right? We are coming up with all of these sort of ideas. We are gathering these loose bits of information and then fabricating stories to sort of make sense of the world. And this is an overlay which we create in order to develop a sense of meaning from our experience. And I've heard it said that if you want to know something, give it a name. But what happens when that name no longer fits the idea or energy that we are trying to know? Sometimes the concepts we are trying to hold slip through the cracks in the containers that we have formed for them. And then the container needs to be reworked, revised, or reformed. And so this is the case with Mercury retrograde. This process happens 3 times a year, oftentimes in the same element. And so this year it's been happening primarily in fire signs with some retrograde back into water signs. And next year, Mercury's retrograde will be happening in the element of water. And so this year, as Mercury retrogrades through fire signs, we're being asked to rework our concept of this inner fire that drives and motivates us, what inspires us and what illuminates our way. We can ask ourselves what heats us up, what inflames us, what cooks us. How do we know this fire and this light? How do you recognize that in yourself? And by what name do we call it? Is it passion? Is it desire? Is it rage? Is it inspiration? Is it appetite? How do we relate to these concepts, to these names? Do they feel accurate? Do they sound correct? Do they fit that fire that's burning somewhere in our heart or in our soul or in our mind? Mercury's retrograde in Leo is an opportunity to reconsider and revise this naming process and how we know this fire in ourselves and how we relate to this inner heat and also how we know and relate to ourselves. Leo is ruled by the sun, and the sun deals with our inner life, the engine of the spirit that drives us and that inner wisdom that directs us. As Mercury moved backwards through this sign and formed its inferior conjunction with the sun, that's the cazimi, back on July 31st, we were given a chance to examine the stories we have been telling about ourselves and about that inner light that motivates us and truly how we know ourselves, the stories that we tell about ourselves, and how we communicate that knowing or that story to ourselves and thus to the world. Through our actions and through our deeds and through our thinking and through our speech, the process of Mercury retrograde has given us a chance to step back from the narrative that we have been spinning, the story that we have been telling, and ask ourselves, is this accurate? We can also ask ourselves, is this even my story that I'm telling? Or is this a story from the media or my culture or my society or my parents that has been told to me so many times that I've kind of mistaken it for my own? And as our minds wander backward through the sun-ruled sign of Leo, we have been given this opportunity to kind of re-examine the stories that we are spinning and the filters that we have constructed through which our experience emanates down, right? That filters down our experience, which gives us the opportunity to know what we know. And if we know what we know only through this filtered reality of somebody else's story, we might want to ask ourselves, is this story really authentic to me? Is this really the filter that I want to be perceiving the world through? Is this story authentic to who I am deep down in the engine of my heart and to who I want to become as I move forward in the world? And so we've been given a chance to review and revise in how we tell our stories and what story we are telling about ourselves and our lives. So we're able to bring the story, the framework of our knowing and our understanding into a better alignment with that inner intelligence that is driving the show from that place that lives beyond language. As Mercury stations direct, there can be a sense of ease. That kind of griminess that has been building over the past few weeks might start to dissipate. Travel and communication might come with a greater sense of ease, which is excellent, feels good. But as these mercurial areas of life kind of smooth out and there is a desire to get back to normal, we don't want to let the lessons or questions that have been raised through the revision process slip through our fingers. Consider what might have been revealed over the past few weeks about how you know yourself or how you identify yourself. And through that naming or categorization, how you know and experience the world. Are these names and labels too big or too small? Do they fit like a great pair of jeans? Do they make your ass look great? Right? Or do they become something that you've outgrown, something that needs a little tailoring and adjusting so that you have a broader range of movement so you can feel more comfortable in your skin? As Mercury moves forward, we have the opportunity to begin integrating these new ways of knowing, these new stories into our lives. We can try on our edits and revisions and see how they fit and how that inner wisdom of the sun feels when we can know it by a different name, when we can funnel it through a different narrative. As travel and e-commerce and communication get a little easier, we get to lean into that space of ease. But we want to remember to honor the ideas and revisions that have been emerging over these past few weeks of disruptions and chaos, right? Which has asked us to really turn inwards and check in with ourselves and really consider the ways that we can begin to weave these new understandings, these new narratives into the ways that we know ourselves and the ways that we make sense of the world. And so also on Monday, August the 11th, and heads up, Monday is a big day. Today is a big day in space. And then it sort of eases out, peters out. And then we have a pretty interesting pair of transits to round out the week. But also today, Monday, August the 11th, let me take a sip of my beverage. Oh, sorry. Let me turn this around so that you can see Selena. So also Monday, August the 11th, we have Saturn retrograde in Aries coming in to form a supportive sextile with Uranus in Gemini. This is going down at 1 degree and 12 arc minutes. So this is the second of 3 Saturn-Uranus sextiles that are occurring over this sort of era, this time period. The first one was back on April the 4th of this year, and the last one will be on January the 19th of 2026. A sextile is a 60-degree angle, and it's the first traditional aspect 2 planets will make after they separate from a conjunction. And this is the last aspect that they will make to close out their synodic cycle, or the cycle of relationship between 2 planets, before they make their next conjunction. The sextile between Saturn and Uranus is the closing sextile, which is helping to open some communication and potentially providing an opportunity for some collaboration between Saturn, the planet of structure, and Uranus, the planet of rebellion. A harmonious aspect like a sextile can also be a chance for some integration, helping us to integrate the Saturnian limits of physical reality with the drive for innovation and need for freedom represented by Uranus. As we consider how the relationship of these archetypes represented by the limit, Saturn, and what lives beyond the limit, Uranus, impact our internal world, we can also look back over the cycle of these 2 planets and see how their relationship has affected the external world. Right now, we are experiencing the closing sextile of the Saturn-Uranus relationship. These 2 planets will be conjunct again in 2032. And right now, they are working to come to terms with their relationship or situationship, if you will, and to understand how to balance the need for freedom fits with the need for structure and what needs to be reworked so that these needs can come into a healthy way of being and inform each other instead of sort of canceling each other out and creating a ton of friction. The friction between I want to be free and that part that's like I need structure. And so we can look back over their cycle, which began with their conjunction in Capricorn in 1987, 1988. This is right around the time of the last Saturn-Neptune conjunction, by the by, which occurred in 89 and is characterized by the fall of the Berlin Wall, Tiananmen Square protests and massacre, as well as the first episode of Seinfeld airing. And we can also reflect on our personal progress and the evolution of the world from that time until the present moment. And so 87, 88, during this Uranus Saturn conjunction, was around the time that the millennial generation was born. And many of those people carry that signature of Saturn and Uranus in conjunction there. And the relationships of these two archetypes can look like trying to build systems and structures while simultaneously trying to blow them up and break them down. When we come into a harmonious aspect, like a sextile or a trine, we're able to create more of a controlled demolition, if you will, or a framework for change. And I think it was Rick Rubin, the guy who produced the Beastie Boys and a bunch of other great music, who said that a rule structures freedom, which I really love that. And this is one of the ways that Uranus and Saturn can work together, providing rules or structures that create freedom. So that freedom just doesn't turn into a state where we have nothing left to lose, because that's not so much fun. Saturn also creates boundaries or the limitations that Uranus pushes at and which in turn drives innovation. Is the system that gives Uranus something to rebel against. Uranus is the outlaw. It's what lives beyond the established order that Saturn has created. And it seeks to shift the values and beliefs of consensus reality that Saturn has really like constructed to achieve the ideal that Uranus holds in their vision. With the sextile, we are looking for that balance place between the old and the new, and between the conservative aspects of society or in ourselves, and the desire to try new things and to push boundaries and to break free from tradition and to experiment with new ways of being and living. The benefit of this harmonious relationship is that it allows us to push into new territory and to touch into the potential of what can be, while giving this potential a concrete and more tangible form. And this allows us to practice integrating new ideas and ways of being that may be initiated by the shifting world and kind of putting them into a framework where these new ideas can be put into practice in order to create lasting change. So we don't want to just blow things up because they're not working without a plan of how to put them back together. And that's in a better way that strives for the ideal. And that's how Uranus and Saturn really work together skillfully. So the sextile is a time for trying new approaches to old problems and to begin to shift patterns that have maybe been running the show for a while. From the perspective of Uranus, who's a sky god, way up there, we can look down on the world that we've been existing in, and have a better view of what might need to shift or adjust to accommodate the change that we want to make. This transit looks to challenge the status quo and also to really consider what changes we can make to the framework which governs the realities that we are living in order to create more space and more freedom in our lives. Again, as a sky god, Uranus lives outside of the normal scope of reality, and it observes things from a very like mental, somewhat detached and idealistic perspective. And it has a tendency to kind of reject anything that it doesn't see as being perfect or good enough. Saturn says, bro, this is reality. This is just how things are. These are the imperfections that exist in the realm of the physical. And these are the compromises that we need to make in order to accept and work with reality. It's one thing to try and reject the limitations of physical reality, but then we move into a victim role, or worse, we ignore the truth about what's actually happening. This transit asks us to embrace both the potential and the limiting structures that potential is the limiting structures in which that potential is formed and comes into being. We need that kind of structure in order to incubate that potential, and then we have to work within that structure to make it real. And when Saturn and Uranus work together skillfully, it gives us the ability to create real and lasting change. It helps the ideal come into being through practice and work, and it offers the rules through which we get to structure our freedom. And I want to close this section with a little passage from Still Life with Woodpecker, which is a novel by Tom Robbins, which I think is really fitting. And thinking about this relationship between Uranus and Saturn, as well as some of the lingering energy from the Aquarius full moon. Like to hear it go. Victim? The difference between a criminal and an outlaw is that while criminals frequently are victims, outlaws never are. Indeed, the first step towards becoming a true outlaw is the refusal to be victimized. All people who live subject to other people's laws are victims. People who break laws out of greed, frustration, or vengeance are victims. People who overturn laws in order to replace them with their own laws are victims. I'm speaking here of revolutionaries. We outlaws, however, live beyond the law. We don't merely live beyond the letter of the law. Many businessmen, most politicians, and all cops do that. We live beyond the spirit of the law. In a sense, then, we live beyond society. Have we a common goal? That goal is to turn the tables on the nature of society. When we succeed, we raise the exhilaration content of the universe. We even raise it a little bit when we fail. And I think that is a great explanation of the way that Uranus functions, and also the need for Saturn to have that structure of the law so that somebody can be living beyond the spirit of it and always striving to push that and change that and upturn that. And that is the way that things evolve. We have that limit and we push against that limit, and the limit opens, and then things change and things develop, and then new limitations, new structures are created around that. And this is the sort of push and pull of reality, and this is how change occurs. So, also, Monday, August the 11th, we have Venus in Cancer conjunct Jupiter in Cancer. So, good news, my friends. Not only do we have Mercury stationing direct today, but we also have a conjunction between the two benefic planets, which is auspicious, to say the least. So, as Venus and Jupiter come together, Venus is the lesser benefic, the benefic of the night. Jupiter is the greater benefic, the benefic of the day. And they come together in a conjunction. And in a conjunction, the ideas and values and vibes of two planets become entwined. The benefic planets promote life. They are warm and moist by nature, and they support growth. They are the ideal conditions for things to grow in. Jupiter, the greater benefic, is exalted in the moon sign of Cancer, where this conjunction is occurring. Jupiter is the planet of expansion and wisdom. They help us to make meaning from experience, and they help us to grow through knowledge. In Cancer, they are expanding our circle of care and reminding us that what we care for cares for us. They also expand our capacity to be vulnerable, which creates the space for deeper and more meaningful connections. Venus is the planet of aesthetics, relationships, beauty, and our value system. Venus deals with our likes and dislikes, what we find attractive or beautiful, what we find drawn to, what we feel repulsed by. In Cancer, Venus seeks to create trust that makes vulnerability possible in order to experience connection and deeper intimacy. It looks to create meaningful, emotional relationships that support our growth through shared values. And again, Jupiter, as the planet of expansion, helps us to expand the circle of care and the circle of connection to allow trust and more connection. coming off last week, which is particularly difficult, we had Mars contacting all of the outer planets and in an opposition with Saturn, which is a tense relationship. And Saturn and Mars are both malefic planets, whereas the benefic planets create the right conditions to promote life. The malefic planets are extra. They are contrary to life. Saturn is too cold and Mars is too hot. Saturn is like a hard frost that kills the harvest, and Mars is like a scorching drought that prevents the crops from going. They're too cold, too hot, whereas the benefics are, in that Goldilocks zone where life likes to flourish. So, coming off of the opposition from Mars and Saturn that was occurring during the Aquarius full moon, we had this kind of relationship between extreme heat and extreme cold in this tense relationship. But now, my friends, we have these two benefic planets coming together to really support life. And again, in the sign of Cancer, this can look like being able to lean into care, to care for ourselves and to care for those that we love and appreciate in our lives. And so I ask you, what does care look like for you? What or who do you care about, or who do you care for? What do you care for? And how can you practice care? What does that even look like? How do you show care? Is it by offering food or attention or emotional or financial support? And how do we practice expanding our ability to care? How can we widen that circle of care? What would that look like for you? So something to think about today is, what is one of the ways that you can show your self-care? And what is one way that you can show another person or sentient being or physical object or place that you care? When Jupiter and Venus come together, they like to have a really good time. They like to get good food, have nice things. Venus is very social and loves connection. Jupiter wants to make that experience bigger and more meaningful. So this is a good time to connect with others, to be social. In Cancer, it may look like sharing a meal or cooking for others. It can look like treating yourself or other people. And this doesn't mean spending a lot of money. Even though Jupiter is like, I don't check the price, all I do is swipe, right? I want it, I got it. There's enough for everybody. Contrary to popular capitalist mythology, more money doesn't equal more love. And I think it has a lot to do, I think care and treating ourselves or treating other people has a lot to do with our attention and our ability to be present with people and places and things, and our ability to show up from a place of openness and sensitivity, as well as our ability to offer our gifts to others, whether that is a smile or taking the time to reach out to somebody and let them know that you appreciate them, or inviting somebody to share a meal with you. We all just really want to be seen. And when we can see somebody, we show our care for them. So this transit happens about once a year, and this is something that we can celebrate. When these two life-giving planets come together, they ask us to practice feeling good. And this, my friends, is something to celebrate. It's also interesting to consider celebrating this astrological alignment, which may seem weird because there doesn't seem like a lot of things to celebrate recently. But if you're listening to this show today, you made it through last week, and that is a cause to celebrate. And I think it's an interesting practice to find things that are working and to honor them through celebration, whatever that looks like to you. Jupiter has a lot to do with optimism, and it feels good to practice optimism by recognizing the good, even in difficult conditions. We can embody the appreciation of the good through celebration. This doesn't need to be like a hedonistic rager. It can be as simple as doing something nice for somebody or something else, or offering some sweetness to yourself, taking yourself to dinner or dressing up, or taking yourself or somebody else out to do something nice, or just to appreciate the good so we don't get worn down by all of the difficulty in the world. It can be as simple as just lighting a candle and reflecting on what feels right. It's important to recognize what's working and what feels good so that we don't get jaded. And as we take the actions to honor what's good, what's working, what feels right or nice, it helps us to touch into an embodied sense that there are things that are pleasurable and supportive in the world and in our lives. And as we acknowledge these places, it really helps to promote that sense of joy. And I think joy is really key to living a meaningful life. I think it's part of why we are here on this earth is to experience joy, not to bypass or ignore the suffering that is a fundamental component of life, but to experience that other end of the spectrum. Right? Joy and suffering are kind of two sides of the same coin, and it's important to have the space to hold both of them. And when the going gets tough, the tough really need to experience joy so they don't get really bitter and closed off. So today, to kick off this week, see where you're able to tap into that sense of joy. And when you find something that brings that sense of joy, see if you can find a way to celebrate it. As you do that, it will help to expand the feelings and the embodied awareness of joy. Because maybe we're just here to experience love and joy, even if the conditions of this world involve suffering. Jupiter says that we are big enough to experience both the bitter taste and the sweetness. And Venus says that's the pain that we experience that also points the way towards the love that we get to share and what feels good and what we want more of. Lastly, like this is a great transit, but I also like to give the cautionary tales, so we don't just wander in blind and be like, everything's going to be great, because that's maybe not how things work all the time, because there is a downside. Too much of a good thing is not necessarily always a good thing. And one of the downsides of this transit can look like overindulgence or laziness. And maybe there's nothing wrong with either of these concepts, but something to just be aware of. Sometimes, in terms of laziness, sometimes it's really good to do nothing. And I respect that. I spent all day in my pajamas last night or yesterday, and it was beautiful. It was a godsend, and sometimes, taking it easy is what you need to do. Right. And sometimes it's important to take it easy so that the sound of your own wheels don't drive you crazy. And in today's world, rest and doing less can be revolutionary acts, but we don't want to move into total sloth mode. Or if we do, we want to have good boundaries around that so we are able to reemerge. And, I think rest and doing less can be ways that we really show ourselves care, even if other people may have opinions about what we should be doing or how much they think we are required to do. And, just thinking about overindulgence, there's no shade if you decide to tie one on, but I think that care and joy come from a state of presence. And when we eat too much or drink too much or go too hard in the paint, maybe it takes us out of being present. We can't really enjoy our food if we are numbing our senses by overeating, and we can't really enjoy our evening if we drink so much that we lose ourselves and aren't present enough to be in connection with the people that we have chosen to celebrate with. Jupiter will say, one more won't hurt. And maybe that's true, but we also got to know when we are approaching our limit and when we are beginning to move out of a state of presence through numbing our senses. And this is a delicate dance with Venus and Jupiter, and knowing how to really be present with what feels good and to hold that without dashing it on the rocks of too muchness. Okay, now, Monday, we had these three transits where Mercury stationing direct, and that sextile between Saturn and Uranus, the conjunction between Jupiter and Venus. And then we get a little space for the middle part of the week. And then on Thursday, August the 14th, we have Mars in Libra sextiling Mercury in Leo. And so this, rounding out the week, we have this kind of interesting situation. We have Mars and Mercury forming two sextiles with each other, one on Thursday, one on Thursday the 14th, and then a few days later on Sunday the 17th. And remember, Mercury is just station direct. And when a planet stations direct or retrograde, they stop or they appear, from our perspective, to stop and stand still in the sky. And then they begin to slowly pick up steam. And Mercury stationed direct back on Monday at the top of the show on the 11th at 4 degrees and 14 arc minutes. And by Thursday, they are slowly starting to move forward. And by Thursday, they have moved less than 1 degree in 4 days, which is pretty slow for Mercury, who moves on average of 1.5 degrees a day. And so, we're getting this interesting supportive relationship between Mercury and Mars twice, which, I think is going to kind of unfold from midweek out through the weekend and into the beginning of next week as they are staying in this close relationship. So, yeah, on Thursday, Mars in Libra kind of catches up to Mercury and perfects the sextile. And remember, a sextile is a 60-degree aspect, so these planets are exactly 60 degrees apart from each other. And this is a supportive aspect, which opens up the possibility of collaboration and communication. And then Mars will continue to move through Libra, and Mars moves a lot slower than Mercury. And then Mercury will start moving a little faster and a little faster in Leo, and then catch up to Mars and perfect a second sextile a few days later on Sunday, the 17th. And this is pretty interesting because this is the only major transit that is happening in the second half of the week, and it's happening twice. The transit's so nice, it happens twice. You know what I'm saying? So we talked about Mercury at the top of the show. They're a planet that rules the way that we process information, how we communicate our experiences, and how we kind of navigate our local environment. Mars is a planet of struggle, conflict, action, appetite, anger, willpower. Mars tells us what is worth fighting for, what fires us up enough to go after what we want, or fires us up enough to struggle against what is preventing us from getting what we want. Last week was all about Mars. You feel it? I felt it. They entered Libra, the sign of their detriment, and then went on to contact all of the outer planets, including Saturn. And last week felt like a lot of struggle, for the most part, a pretty uphill battle. But that was my personal experience. I'm curious what was going on for other people. And so, as Mars makes these two sextiles to Mercury at the end of the week, we get the opportunity to process some of the information that came up over last week. What was difficult? What was driving us? What made us angry? What were we fighting for or against? Mercury helps us to name some of these things, and it helps us to cognitively process some of the information that we were gathering from our Mars battles last week. We can consider what stories we are creating from our experience over the past week. And these stories, are those stories helpful, or are they ways that, there's some ways that these can be adjusted to help us feel a little bit more authentic or a little bit more balanced? What did we learn from our adventures or our battles or our struggles, from what was difficult? And how can we integrate those learnings into our lives this week? We may experience this series of sextiles as some insight that begins to reveal itself on Thursday. And then we have the opportunity to integrate some of that insight into our lives as we begin to move into next week through the weekend. So Mars has these two children, Deimos and Phobos, who are the embodiment of fear and terror, or panic, who were always with Mars, or Ares, as he was known in the Greek, when he rode into battle. And so, coming off this opposition to Saturn, Mars's opposition to Saturn, and Neptune, which may have brought up limiting beliefs or feelings of powerlessness and frustration from Saturn, as well as feelings of low energy and anxiety from Neptune. Mars's children may be riding with him into battle this week. There's a lot of fear that's moving through the collective these days as the world feels increasingly unstable and the forces of control seek to gain more power. And this morning, I haven't had the time to really research this, but it seems like Trump just took over Washington, D.C., and is calling out the National Guard, and this is a fear tactic of creating an emergency to, bring in martial or military forces. So this idea of fear or panic or paranoia or terror, activating the collective and creating a reason for control to try and usurp more power and using martial forces like the military, the National Guard to militarize a city in America and to try and consolidate power. Again, I haven't really had the time to research this, but it makes me feel some types of ways. And, I think as Mars comes into the supportive aspect with Mercury, it gives us the chance to observe some of the places where fear and panic may be operating in our system and influencing our thinking and our actions. So while the government is using fear tactics and panic in order to declare martial law and to create a state of emergency that they can respond to out of nothing, and they can respond to militantly, it's also on us to notice, how does this feel in my system? What's coming up for me? Does this activate fear? And how does that fear create a story, which is then driving some of my thoughts and actions? And so, also with Mars's opposition to Neptune, which occurred around the full moon last week or over the weekend, people have maybe felt a sense of being tired or low energy as we ended out last week. And I definitely felt that. I was exhausted. And I know when I get tired or feel drained, my mind does some wild things, and feeling of anxiety or definitely paranoia begin to surface. And I start concocting some wild stories about my life. And so, with the Mars Mercury sextile, it might be a good time to step back and ask ourselves, what's actually happening here? Where do I have agency to act? What is the next right thing to do? And to just notice if our thoughts or actions are motivated by fear, anxiety, panic, paranoia. And is it possible to come into a sense of presence and rework some of these stories that we are telling ourselves? And as well as observing the stories and information that we are taking in and noticing if these are playing on or amplifying already existing fears. And I think it's really important to be aware of what's happening in the world, but also remember that fear is the mind killer. And we need to discern which information helps us to have a greater sense of agency and allows us to make empowered choices, and what information creates panic or dysregulation or paranoia and really causes us to spiral out. So there's this Tibetan dakini named Troma. Hold, please. I'm going to go grab a visual aid. Thank you for your patience. This is my homie Troma. So, this is a representation of the fierce mother. Got this crown of skulls and a skull cap bowl, and has these flayed skins that she wears as a dress. It's like pretty terrifying. And she carries this cutting blade in one of her hands up here. And I've heard it said that her function is to kind of cut through the tangle of the mind. And I heard it described that the mind and all its thoughts are like a bale of hay that's really tightly bound. And trauma comes in with this cutting blade and slices through the tight tangle of thoughts and worries and paranoias and fears. And as she cuts through this bundle of thought, this tangle of mind, with this swift strike, the sort of hay bale or this tangle of mind separates into silence, and it creates a opening for more spaciousness. And I think part of what we can get from this supportive sextile from Mars, who is cutting, Mars is the blade, and Mercury, who is the mind, is the energy of this fierce bikini over here to cut through the knot of the mind with its fears and worries and endless spirals and doom scrolling, to open up some spaciousness and a little bit of clarity. And this is maybe something to consider over the second half of the week. What are the ways that I can sort of call in this energy, and use Mars in this way to cut through this tangle, this tightly bunched tangle of my mind, and to create a little silence, a little bit more space, a little bit more openness, so that some clarity can emerge. And as Mercury contacts Mars these two times, as we round out the week, we may get some more information on what Mars in Libra is asking for, and what it is trying to reveal around issues of conflict, harmony, action and balance, anger and diplomacy. The cognitive abilities of Mercury may help us to recognize where the Libra scales are kind of out of balance and what might need to be cut away in order to bring these two pans of the scale into better alignment. This is also a good time for focused mental activity. Mercury is our thinking processes, and Mars drives us and helps us to direct that energy. It can help us to have conversations where we can kind of cut through the bullshit, cut through the small talk, get to the point. This combination with Mars and Libra may help us to say things that need to be said, but in ways that they can be heard, which is really important. But it's also important not to overthink things, but to stay focused on what needs to be communicated. And this goes for both conversations with others as well as the projects that we find ourselves engaged in. What needs to be said? And what is the most skillful way to say it? Mars sextile to Mercury helps us to cut to the chase and drive home the point that we are trying to make. Topics may be revisited or revised or edited throughout the second half of the week as Mars and Mercury perfect their second sextile. And there may be some restless mental energy that comes up, and just see if you can find projects or things to focus on in order to channel that energy in skillful ways. And this things that are begun around Wednesday or Thursday should continue to occupy your thoughts throughout the weekend. And we may find ourselves feeling really busy, and it's important to direct our mental and physical energy towards the things that feel meaningful and important for us. And if that energy is siphoned off by someone or something else, it might create a story in one's mind that can lead to resentment. So just watch out for that. This transit is also a chance to observe our thoughts and to recognize what is driving our thinking, and to consider what thoughts are driving our actions. This is a great transit to have some awareness around our attention and where we are directing our attention, which is very precious. And to see if our thinking is being run by resentments or anger or jealousy or fear, and how that may be impacting the actions that we find ourselves wanting to take or taking. If our thoughts are being hijacked by some unprocessed emotional material or a story that we are creating, we may want to kind of slow down and consider other ways that we can process these feelings or thoughts. And there may be a fair amount of material coming to the surface after Mars's ingress into Libra last Thursday, which felt pretty spicy, and all of Mars's transits to the outer planets, including a tense opposition to Saturn and Neptune during the full moon and over the weekend. And Mars is not a thinking guy. Mars is an action guy. So feelings come up, Mars acts, Mars reacts. And Mercury can maybe help us to think about, okay, what is that feeling? What is that thing that's driving me? Can I respond instead of just reacting? So we want to find skillful ways of processing the feelings that might have gotten stirred up last week so that they don't just hijack our thoughts and start running the show. And so one of the insights that I had, and this is just me, and this came during the full moon, is that dancing is a really good way for me to work with or to remediate Mars in Libra, who is in detriment there. Libra is ruled by Venus, which is aesthetic and deals with things like beauty and music. Mars is athletic and deals with things like action, activity, and movement. So you put them together and you move to the music. You know what I'm saying? And I found dancing to be a great way of using that martial energy and desire for combat and struggle in a very Venusian way. And you don't have to go dancing. That's not everybody's cup of tea necessarily. But things like physical activity can be a good way of honoring that Mars part of ourselves. And it may help us to move some of the feelings through to allow some more clarity for Mercury to help make sense of things. And if you want to be moving and moving that energy through physically, I recommend doing it in a Libran or Venusian way where it can be beautiful. Yeah, astrology by moonlight saying beat up the beat. Exactly. So instead of having these old stories that are based in frustration or struggle or fear be what's running the show, we can get a little bit of space. If we can get a little bit of space, and Mercury can help us to recognize our underlying drives and what's motivating us at the moment, then we can practice reworking and coming into a little bit more mental awareness so the stories we are concocting about our lives can feel better aligned with the lives that we actually want to be living. And something to be aware of is that Mars Mercury combos like to argue. Okay. And with a sextile, this isn't so much about conflict as it is about connection. However, Mars likes to find connection through combat, through conflict. So just notice the conversations and the topics that you discuss during the second half of this week. And themes or ideas may arise that help you to process some of the Mars information that's been coming up around desire or motivation, as well as feelings of frustration or issues around conflict. And Mercury and Leo themes may also be coming up as we begin to gain a deeper awareness around the information gathered through Mercury's retrograde and issues of authenticity and the ways that we are able to express ourselves in the world and in our lives. Mars urges us to take action around our new understandings that are emerging into conscious awareness. Mercury thinks thoughts and talks about what they notice and what they're thinking. Mars says, bro, talk is cheap, and urges us to take action to make things happen and to initiate change. Again, this new awareness and the ability to act on what comes up for us will be unfolding over the second half of the week. So we don't really need to feel like we're rushing into anything. I just recommend seeing what's up with you come Thursday or Friday and considering the right actions to take, which can be implemented over the weekend or through the beginning of next week. This sextile offers us the right mixture of thought and action. And when they work together, they're a really powerful combination that can initiate a lot of activity or change. And then again, just to round us out, Sunday, August the 17th, Mercury and Gemini will again sextile Mars and Libra. And this time it's happening at 7 degrees and 4 arc minutes. But I don't need to talk about all that because I just talked about all that. And that is all the astro weather that is fit to print, my friends. Thank you all for tuning in and listening to your Wizard Report. Again, my name is Jonah Emerson Bell. I'm a tarot reader and astrologer and licensed mental health counselor in the great state of New Mexico. I also do astrological coaching and sometimes an astrology themed radio show, which I've decided to take a much deserved summer break for, but that will be back at y'all in the fall. And I've been collecting tons of music for the time when I have the time to put it together. So stay tuned for that in the not so distant future. And for now, you can catch me every Monday, 11-ish Mountain Time on the Instagram Live. This also comes out on YouTube on my channel Camp Wizard Camp, as well as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, blah, 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 wherever you get your podcasts out at, under the title of This Week in Space with 3 exclamation points, not to be confused with This Week in Space with 0 exclamation points, because I don't think they're very excited about what's happening in space. Not like I am. You know what I'm saying? Um, ooh, and so yeah, that's it. Go and be merry, my friends. Remember to celebrate yourself or something else today in any way that you want, but I think that taking time to celebrate, especially when things are bleak, when things are dark, when things are troublesome, finding something good and celebrating the fuck out of it, I think is an important way to cultivate joy and to be able to share joy. Because if we don't feel joy, if we don't experience joy, if we don't share joy with each other, then the fascists win, and I'm not going to let that happen. Okay? So help me out. Help us defeat fascism by experiencing some joy today and celebrating the fuck out of it. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Again, I am co-facilitating a retreat in Epidavros, Greece, for the autumnal equinox. It'll be September 20th through 27th. And yeah, you can check out the website. There's a link in my bio. There's a link in the show notes. It's themysteries.org. And yeah, come join us in Greece. Let's celebrate there. And thank you, Jesse Brown. The revolution is Venusian. And I think that's really important to remember. So make it beautiful, make it fun. Because if there's no dancing, it's not my revolution. You know what I'm saying? I'm talking dance revolution. I'm talking revolution of joy. I'm talking resistance through pleasure and joy. And yeah, I hope you can take that with you today. And happy Mercury direct, everybody, and happy Jupiter Venus conjunction. And just yeah, find something good to celebrate. And I'll see y'all next week. Same wizard time, same wizard channel. And until next time, my friends, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, may the force be with you. Bye now.